Hello, beautiful community. I'm going to make a quick analytical comment about Putin's pronouncements about the counteroffensive. So let's see what he said. He said that it can be said for sure that the Ukrainian offensive has begun, and this is evidenced by the use of strategic reserves. It is obvious that there is not a single direction in which the Ukrainians have managed to realize the aims they've set themselves. Intense fighting has been going on for 5 days, especially the previous 2 days. The heroism and courage of our soldiers and correct leadership Okay, should be noted. We don't have enough modern weaponry, but our military-industrial complex is developing fast, and I'm sure all the problems that we have will be solved in time. So there are 4 takeaways from this. And I've made a note of them not to forget. So the first one is that Putin takes the counteroffensive very seriously. So what that really means is that Putin's trying to play his waiting game. Probably the first kind of sensation of reaching shore that he has is perhaps 2025, when a little more time has passed for the West to get exhausted, when the big election has taken place in the most major Western power. And Putin wants to get to that place, both without suffering a catastrophic defeat and without being forced into making any dramatic changes at home. We'll say more about that in a second. So Putin understands that what's at stake for him, perhaps even this summer, is, how durable his plan is of waiting out until the West exhausts itself. He understands that nothing really can come in between him and at least partially succeeding with that plan, except Ukraine's counteroffensive going very, very well. So he understands that this is existential for his strategy of victory in the long term, even potentially including his strategy of victory in a second Ukrainian war he prosecutes in 2028. The second aspect to his statement is, of course, the typical Russian propaganda strategy of demoralizing Ukraine's and Western endeavors as having failed before they have begun. So, this is like a football manager running onto the pitch when the game is only 10 minutes old, shouting, "We haven't lost!" And that indicates in itself that Putin is aware that the substantial parts of the counteroffensive aren't here yet. So Putin saying it has started is in fact Putin saying, I recognize that in the main it probably hasn't started yet. The third takeaway here is that Putin is very partially attaching himself to the outcome, which is rare for him. Putin does not want to take sides. It undermines his power. And it undermines his power, in fact, as the only institution with perceived political legitimacy in Russia. If he excessively takes part, you can see how he stands away and would never pronounce, except perhaps as a joke, on Prigozhin's dispute with the Ministry of Defense, right? It's not because he is got some kind of secret plan and he's entirely with one side and not the other. It's actually because he is trying to not muddy himself as an institution by being seen as getting involved, because the point is that such conflicts occur below him, and if he intervenes as a referee. So he knows that standing back is part of how he works as an institution with perceived legitimacy. And it's a very interesting point here, because the Russian state in its current form can't really persist without Putin. That's very important to understand when we talk about transitions, right? So Putin is not just the captain of a ship, who doesn't actually have as much power as a captain would normally have, but he's certainly the main person, the person with the single biggest amount of power on that ship. But it's also the case that the ship is called Putin, right? If you wave the magic wand and send Mr. Putin completely nuts, such that he appointed Mr. Prigozhin as monarch in residence and went himself to live in Siberia, that story wouldn't last very long, because Mr. Prigozhin would have no perceived legitimacy. The main political institution, right, with perceived legitimacy that holds the whole state together would be gone. So how far is Putin getting behind this counteroffensive so that a defeat in it would be associated with his name? Well, it obviously anyway would be associated with his name, but you could be excused for thinking he would want to stay out of commenting too directly on how the counteroffensive is going and leave that matter to people below him. But I think he has been persuaded by the Ministry of Defense that there's a really good chance that Russia will hold. And he's come out in public and took a stand behind that line. If or when it begins to fall apart, he will, of course, make sure that the entire blame falls on the people prosecuting the war, and he will try again to isolate himself as a political institution from those responsible for the failure. The fourth takeaway is one that takes us back to the first one. And that's that I think that Putin recognizes, and it's even palpable with this statement, that the Russian state cannot go on as it's going now if a big defeat occurs. And on this, I think Putin thinks that he'll have to reformat the Russian state to some extent, but is not ready to do it now, and he doesn't think it's even doable now. And that reformatting of the state would be about another quite aggressive totalitarian turn, more than what we saw at the beginning of the war, and a greater politicization of society. And he thinks that reluctantly he's going to have to do it anyway at some point, but he thinks it's wrong to do it now or soon. And he is aware that this sort of planning could get impacted by the counteroffensive, and he may be in a position where he's forced to do something that he has reluctantly accepted he's going to have to do in the medium term, but that he doesn't want to do in the short term and doesn't believe is necessarily doable in the short term. So that's all my reflection for today. If you haven't seen my concise major statement on the counteroffensive, go and have a look at it. It's up on the main channel. Interestingly, the video is not doing very well in terms of folks who are following the channel clicking on it, which is interesting. Probably it's to do with the wrapper I put in it, because I do think that the global questions the counteroffensive raises are of absolutely paramount importance now. because we're really in a situation where the political story is going to be following the military story, not the other way around. So the military story is not just important because military progress is important for Ukraine. It's also important because even the West's political strategy toward this war and toward Ukraine and Russia is in part dependent on what happens on the battlefield. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Lots of love for the moment. Bye bye.